What's up, guys? Welcome to the Planet Soccer Show here on YouTube. I'm your host, Reed Simpson. Today, I am by myself. I'm still trying to work out the kinks on getting me and Dylan's video to line up perfectly so that he's not a few milliseconds ahead of me. And you can't really tell that he's ahead until you can tell, and then you can really tell, if that makes sense. To the naked eye, it doesn't look like it right away. But then when you hear kind of his voice overlap mine, you can really tell it's off. So for now, we're just going to do YouTube videos solo, and I'm calling it the Planet Soccer Show because we do have our podcast, which is out on all platforms, called Planet Soccer. And this is just going to be the start of kind of a weekly series recapping the week in the Premier League, the games that went down maybe, later in the year. We'll do FA Cup recaps and Carabao Cup recaps, things like that. But this week, it's just going to be week one. Let's get right to it. Probably 20 or so minute episodes. We'll get started with the first game of the week. Happened on Friday. It was Arsenal versus Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace side that there are a lot of mixed feelings on. By the way, my notes are over there, so you'll see me looking over there a lot, just looking at my notes. So Crystal Palace, a side that people are kind of torn on. A lot of people can see them finishing, closer to 15th or so, and some people see them close and pushing closer to 10th. So a lot of it depends on their youth, a lot of quality youth. However, against Arsenal on Friday, they looked disoriented, they looked unorganized, they looked young. They did, and Arsenal looked very technical, very intentional, very smart on the pitch. Their possession was fantastic. Their movement, everybody seemed to be in the right place when they needed to. Gabriel Jesus, I don't believe he got his first goal. You could tell he was really pushing for it, especially there early in the game. However, he did not end up getting that. But Arsenal took care of Crystal Palace 2-0. Ramsdale got the clean sheet, and I think he was the top Premier League keeper for fantasy soccer or fantasy football, fantasy Premier League, whatever, fantasy football, saying that sounds weird. Really just their Arsenal can be as technically sound as, I don't want to say as the cities, but as the, Liverpools and the Tottenhams of the world, especially in their midfield. They've got a fantastic midfield when those youngsters are firing with Odegaard and Emile Smith-Rowe and Saka, who kind of plays more of a wing, but they looked really good. And, I think Dylan and I both have Arsenal finishing in the top four, and they looked a top four side on Friday. So, like I said, Arsenal 2, Crystal Palace 0. Crystal Palace really just didn't look good. They looked young, like I said. So, moving on, let's do Leeds and Wolves. Leeds a side that's a very popular relegation pick, and I mentioned in the Premier League preview episode that I don't know if it's just that international bias kind of against America, because Leeds has kind of taken on that role as America's team because of their coach Brendan Aronson, Tyler Adams. But the Americans were very involved in Leeds' win over Wolves, two sides that will probably finish in the bottom half of the league. Although I do have Leeds maybe surprising some people. Wolves, just there's a lack of scoring there, especially if they end up getting rid of Ruben Neves before the transfer window's out. Brendan Aronson, though, was very involved. He was in the right place always. His pressing, it led to winning the ball back. Rodrigo, his Aronson's pressing led to a Rodrigo goal, and really just the spacing and the places that Brendan Aronson needed to be and the time he needed to be there, he hit the mark. So I think he got either a goal or an assist taken off the board. I haven't watched the Leeds match. I'm going to watch it tomorrow before Dylan and I actually record this week's podcast episode. And then speaking of Tyler Adams, he looked comfortable on the ball. He looked like a really solid Premier League pivot player. And Wolves is a solid defensive team. They play a low block, so they're not a super high pressing team. So he wasn't asked to maybe break any presses. However, he looked unfazed. He looked comfortable. Tyler Tyler Adams and Brendan Aronson are both relatively small players comparatively to their peers in the Premier League. So they might be, bullied physically at times, but they looked on par technically with Wolves at least. So I think that both these players being in the Premier League is really going to benefit the U.S. men's national team, especially when they go into play England and Wales, because a lot of, there's obviously the whole English national team, maybe apart from Fikayo Tomori, is in the Premier League. So, Tyler Adams getting to, see how the Declan Rices play and kind of playing that number 6, number 8, whatever Jesse Marsch needs him to do against those English sides will really benefit him heading into Group B in the World Cup. And same for Aronson. I think Aronson doesn't get enough credit for what he did at Salzburg, especially in the Champions League. He never looked intimidated when they were playing in the Champions League. He got goals under his belt. He got assists under his belt. He's a confident player. He's tenacious. He's my favorite player on the U.S. men's national team. I think he's going to be a really solid Premier League player. So Wolves, like I said, I haven't watched the game. Wolves did score. The final was Leeds 2, Wolves 1. But Wolves just, I don't think they have very much horsepower on the offensive end, and that clearly showed in their game against Leeds. So speaking of offensive horsepower, let's go over to the Tottenham-Southampton game. Of course, I'm a Spurs fan. I'm always going to preface that whenever I talk about Spurs. And I do want to say that the Southampton looked really bad in this game. They did. They looked outmatched. They looked just their will was essentially broken. And I think a big key for the general public to take away from this game, obviously I've dissected this game. I've listened to podcasts, 4 or 5 hour-long podcasts, Spurs podcasts talking about this game. So I can talk about how Tottenham looked at length, but I think the one thing to take away as kind of an outside observer on this game is that Tottenham scored 4 goals, and Harry Kane and Heung-min Son didn't score any of them. So Dejan Kulusevski looked every part a Premier League Player of the Year candidate in this one. It's crazy that he just turned 22 about 3 months ago. It's absolutely insane. Christian Romero, he's going to be in the discussion for top center back in the Prem at the end of this year. That's absolutely not an exaggeration. If you know ball, you know that's true. Don't lie to yourself. Kane and Son were pretty much non-existent in this one. They really were. And Tottenham, they dominated the ball, which I don't think they will in many games because they have such an intentional, quick attack. It's very, they don't play possession heavy. But in the midfield, Betancourt and Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, they stole the show. They normally do. They're a fantastic 1-2 punch in that midfield. They play really well together. They play well, with each other and off of each other. So it was really positive. Pierre-Emile Højbjerg had a fantastic through ball to Emerson Royale down the right hand side, and Emerson found Kulusevski for his goal. So those guys, they're not going to get the numbers that a lot of midfielders do in the Prem because they're asked to do a different thing, but they're every bit the quality of some of those guys that are talked about. So Tottenham looked fantastic. Southampton looked like a relegation team. So yeah, I mean, that's what it is. Let's get into the Everton-Chelsea game. Pretty uninspired game on both sides. A couple things to take away is that Everton lost Godfrey, which is a big injury for them. He came off on a stretcher, which that's obviously not good, not a good sign for Everton, who's already really without depth, without good shape, without quality. So Everton just right off the bat, not catching any breaks. Chelsea looked, I caught a little bit of this game. Chelsea just didn't look fantastic. I think they won on a penalty. And yeah, I know Chelsea has issues at Goodison Park, which, is understandable knowing that that happens in the Premier League. Tottenham's the same way at Chelsea. It's just a mental block. So I won't read too much into this one for Chelsea. We'll really obviously get the bar set for both them and Tottenham this week when the Blues face off against Spurs at Stamford Bridge. 1-0 Chelsea. I mean, not a whole lot to be said about this one. Let's talk Fulham Liverpool 2-2 draw. This was a surprise, maybe not the biggest surprise of the weekend. Maybe it was. Liverpool's midfield depth really came to light in this one. I believe it was Thiago, maybe Firmino. Forgot who it was. Liverpool got a midfield injury. They're severely lacking depth. It kind of makes me wonder: are they going to end up going after? I don't know if they'll. I doubt they'll be able to get Bellingham this summer at this point. But are they going to have to end up going after another midfielder? It might be an older guy just to kind of fill that role, because Liverpool's depth is getting pretty questionable in the midfield, which really, starting to question Liverpool's depth anywhere is not something that I expected to see at all this year. But that's just the case. Overall, Darwin Núñez, he came off the bench again like he did against City in the Community Shield, and he sparked something right away. He hasn't looked great. He's looked kind of poor at times, but he gets in the right place and he puts the ball in the back of the net, and that's been evident in the past 2 games where I've watched him. He shows a lot of emotion. He's very fiery on the pitch. And you have to think Firmino's days are numbered up top. So, Fulham, on the other hand, Mitrovic, he looks like he might score goals in the Prem this year, a lot of them. And if he does, watch out for Fulham. They can be a very good side if he continues to score. Like I said, Fulham 2, Liverpool 2, an interesting early season draw. Fun fact. It's just one of those facts that it has no true meaning, but it just does because it is a fact. A team that has not beaten a newly promoted side in week 1 of the Premier League has never won the Premier League. So I'm sure that's not going to be a reason that Liverpool doesn't win the Prem, but it's just a precedent that's been set. So interesting little tidbit. Let's go over to the other side of the 1-2 punch, or the top 2, if you will, in the league, at least by standings last year, and that's Man City. Man City faced West Ham on Sunday night. It was the Monday, maybe. No, it was the last game of the week. A lot of people are singing Erling Haaland's praises after that one. He scored 2 goals. I get it. Had two on the sheets, 2 on the sheet. But they were tap-ins. I mean, he got himself in the right position, almost all the time. He really struggled in tight spaces sometimes. That's just kind of that's going to be the case for him in the Premier League until he gets his footing. But he put 2 home. De Bruyne gave him a beautiful through ball that he finished, a pretty easy goal for any competent striker, and then he converted a penalty as well. So he was a threat to score in nearly every possession. I saw a bunch of memes at the end of the game of West Ham defenders just looking relieved that the game was over at that point because they didn't have to look after him anymore. It's something that's going to be interesting to see going forward as Man City continues to face physical defenses. Is Erling Haaland going to be able to operate in those tight spaces, because he's going to have to be technical. He's not going to be able to overpower a whole lot of Premier League defenders. Maybe he will, but overall it will be more. He'll have to beat them on technical ability as opposed to physicality, because the Premier League has some physical defenders. Man City 2, West Ham 0. I didn't watch this game, so I just read about it, watched highlights. West Ham, it didn't play bad from what I've heard. They faced City, and City looked good on that day, so that really speaks for itself. Let's go over to Brighton, or I should say Manchester. It's Brighton versus Man U. And this was really the interesting one. Everybody kind of went into this game, looking at how Man United would look under Erik ten Hag in week 1. And not to say that anything Ten Hag did affected the game, but Man U just isn't good. If you open TikTok and you get soccer videos, every video I feel like I've gotten is just people talking shit on Scott McTominay, and he was bad. Don't get me wrong, but the whole team was bad. They started Christian Eriksen up top at striker, which is not what he plays. They eventually moved him to a more of a pivot role towards the end of the game or in the second half, and they looked a lot better. But I mean, they would just concede, the ball, concede possession, in their own zone, high up the field, and it was just it was a very, very mid-table performance for Man United, and Brighton kind of took it to them. 2-1, it's kind of the opposite case, whereas, Brighton with Graham Potter, they know what system they play. They're comfortable in it. They're confident in it, and they're intentional. And it's very much similar to how Tottenham has bought into Conte's system, and they're going to play that system, and they're going to play it perfectly because it's just been drilled into them. Same with Arsenal, the technical possession-based. Brighton looked like a team that can challenge for Europe. In this one, I mean, obviously the headlines will read about how bad United was, and they were poor, but Brighton was really good. I don't know. It's Man United needs guys that can put the ball in the back of the net. I know they have Ronaldo. I don't think he lasts the month at United, though. He wants out. He didn't start. I know that was like somewhat not form fitness based because he kind of sat out some of the preseason. But Jadon Sancho, Bruno Fernandes, Marcus Rashford, going forward, they didn't look super clinical. They didn't look competent. They didn't look good at all. And the back line was no different. I mean, what was Luke Shaw doing on that first goal? I mean, just horrible. Harry Maguire said after the game that they've got a lot of learning to do, and a lot of it's on the mental side, which is just weird to me because, at every line of their, or every level of their team at the back, in the midfield and at the front, they've got experience. They've got Champions League experience. They shouldn't need to mentally learn under this new coach. I get he brings a different mentality. However, this Man United team shouldn't need to mature, shouldn't need to learn, mental tactics, mental fortitude under this new guy. It was weird. But looking to how they finished last year, it really wasn't weird. And if this is the Man United we're going to see moving forward, they might not make Europe unless they make some serious upgrades. Erik ten Hag really needs Frankie de Jong to play that 6. Will he get him? I don't know. At this point, I don't know. Moving on, we've got a couple left. Newcastle just really smothered Nottingham Forest. They struggled to finish, which I know Dylan will speak to what Newcastle needs to do in the remainder of this transfer period to get more goals, but they looked really good. I mean, they outclassed Forest the entire 90 minutes. Took them a minute, I think 58, 59 minutes to get the ball in the back of the net. But, when they did, it was a good finish, and Newcastle 2, Forest 0. Like I said, I'll let Dylan talk more about this on the podcast tomorrow. So I'll kind of lay off this one. The headline that I wrote a little headline for every game, and I just wrote Newcastle smothers Forest. So that kind of tells you how that went. Speaking of Jesse Lingard, I think he had like 30-something touches. I think he gave the ball away 9 times maybe. If he's going to play in that creative role, he needs to be a lot better. I know he hasn't played competitive games in a while, but he will need to be a lot better if he's going to help Forest stave off relegation. Let's go to maybe the biggest surprise of the week. It's Bournemouth 2, Aston Villa 0. The last time Bournemouth was in the Premier League, they conceded 65 goals. It's almost 2 a game. It was the third most in the league. That was in 1920. And, you have to give them credit because the way they defended on Saturday was just fantastic. Villa is a very competent offensive team. They're creative. They can get the ball in the back of the net, and Bournemouth played very organized, very sound, and they scored 2 goals. So it's not like they parked the bus and they won 1-0 or they played that low block like Burnley and just smothered you until they got a ball to bounce their way. No, they beat Villa soundly. Their 3 center backs, Mepham, I think that's how you say his name, Kelly, and then Lerma, who was actually one of their goal scorers. They were pretty timely and clinical inside the penalty area. They had 27 clearances between them. They did sit deep, but they weren't inactive by any means. The team wasn't inactive on the offensive side. So Scott Parker's squad looked really good. And for Villa, it might just be a weird game. But these are the games they need to get at least a point. I mean, they really need to win them if they want to contend for Europe, which I think if you ask any Villa fan, that would be their goal this year is to contend for Europe. But yeah, Bournemouth, props to them because Dylan and I just spent a whole podcast episode talking about how Bournemouth was essentially a lock to go back down, and they looked anything but on Saturday. The last game, kind of the cage fight of the week, if you will. Leicester and Brentford, 2 teams that are both very, very good in the midfield. Leicester's midfield in particular. I mean, James Maddison was as creative as it gets. He normally is. Looking through my notes here, Leicester went ahead on a corner. Both midfields looked confident, and they looked prepared to pull off any feat. It was just a dogfight in the midfield, and I think Brentford, Leicester had, I believe it was a 2-0 lead, and Brentford clawed back, or maybe it was 2-1. But 2 teams that have pretty high aspirations. I know Brentford, last year was their first year up, I believe, and they stayed up, and they're, without Eriksen, they're looking to do the same, and it'll be interesting. But drawing games like that versus Leicester is serious business, and it's inspiring. Good for Brentford. As for Leicester, I said that the game was dominated by their midfield, and their midfield is kind of the X factor for them this season, and not the X factor like their play on the field, whether they're on the field for Leicester is the big thing. Madison's been linked to Newcastle. I think the Tottenham links are pretty much dead at this point. Sounds like Tottenham has other targets. And then Tielemans, who he didn't really have a very big impact in this one. I don't even know if I didn't make any notes about him, but really Madison's the big one. Leicester's gonna go as Madison goes this year, and if he goes, then Leicester is gonna go down the table. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got on that one. I didn't watch the game. I just read notes on it. I don't even think I watched highlights. That's week 1. So after week 1, we've actually got, let's see here. After week 1, it's Tottenham atop the table with 3 points and a 3-goal differential. Bournemouth second with a 2-goal differential. Arsenal third with a 2-goal differential, and Man City fourth with a 2-goal differential. So the losers on week 1, Man United, Wolves, Everton, Villa, Crystal Palace, Forest, West Ham, Southampton. I would say out of those teams, Everton was playing Chelsea, so they were probably expected to lose. But Wolves and Southampton, the way Southampton lost was very concerning. And then obviously Man United, probably the 3 most disappointing losses. Brentford, really good draw. Fulham, really good draw. Leicester, probably disappointing draw. Liverpool, obviously a disappointing draw. Big wins for Bournemouth, Brighton, Leeds. It's going to be a dogfight this year. It's exciting. So, like I said, that's week 1 of the Planet Soccer Show, Premier League Roundup, and we will see you guys next week. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. Let us know what you think. Y'all have a good night, and we'll talk to y'all later.